What's up everyone, welcome back to Switchcraft, and it's a great day to be a gamer. In fact, it's never been a greater day to be a gamer. With today's modern technology, we've never been able to be more immersed in video games. Bits and pixels aren't even talked about anymore. Because there are so many of them, we'd have to use numbers most people aren't comfortable with when counting them. But in my personal video game life, and I've noticed this across the internet, no generation seems to get more love, nostalgia, and rose-colored glasses treatment than the 16-bit generation. Why? And what does balance have to do with it? Let's talk about it. Ask anyone old enough to have been playing video games in the 80s or 90s, and they won't stop talking about the good old days of Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. If you ask anyone over the age of maybe 25 what their top 3 to 5 video games are of all time, you're guaranteed to get at least one title from one of these consoles. You're very likely to get a number 1 spot taken up by a 16-bit title as well. With modern games, we have photorealistic graphics, more resolution than you can shake a stick at, more games being released than ever, and more places to find out about games and be exposed to different titles than ever before. Considering that, how is it possible everyone's favorite games aren't ones that released in the last couple of years? The 16-bit era of video games achieved a balance, in my opinion. A balance that was limited by technology of the day and made timeless by it as well. You need only to look at games like the brightly colored and quick-scrolling Sonic the Hedgehog, and mood-setting and story-driven titles like Chrono Trigger and A Link to the Past. These games got the most from their respective hardware and don't hold a candle to the visual spectacles that are today's games. This same hardware limitation, though, forced the video game developers to be more creative in other ways. Music was more memorable because it was more melodic and was a requirement to set the mood. It was essential to set the mood in games like Super Metroid and Phantasy Star 2 and 3. To this day, I catch myself humming music from 16-bit titles way more often than modern titles. While music was essential to bridge the gap between the graphics on these systems and the real world, the then still pixelated visuals forced gamers to do something that is underappreciated and underutilized in today's games: use their imagination. Not much thinking or imagination is required to see yourself in today's games, as your eyes can barely tell the difference between what's going on screen and everywhere else. This allows the information gathered by your eyes to bypass the creative and interpretive and subjective half of your brain and go right to the analytical. You see the games as the developers intended, and nothing is left for your interpretation. Your experience is therefore very carefully curated and specific. Having graphics less than lifelike makes them slightly different to everyone looking at them. Think about how important it used to be to have great box art for your game, and you'll really start to understand where I'm coming from. In a simpler time, except for the rare monthly video game magazine, box art on store shelves was all you had to go by. It may have been the biggest and most important factor for what game would be next. At least it was for me. And I always gravitated to the ones that had the best artwork. Artwork that told a story. Artwork that painted a picture in my mind. Stirred that primal urge within each and every one of us to explore the unknown. To go on an adventure. I believe that's why, 25, 30 years later, we're still talking about these titles so much. I believe that the best studios try and capture this. It's how a game like Octopath Traveler can be so successful. It's also why games like Axiom Verge and Stardew Valley have such a loyal following. It's what YouTubers like the Happy Console Gamer capture so well. It's why I can appreciate companies like Nintendo and the games that I find myself playing on the Switch in spite of this particular console not being the most graphically powerful. It's more about depth of experience rather than breadth. It's more about Steven Spielberg than Michael Bay. It's more about Star Wars Episode 4, 5, and 6 rather than 1, 2, and 3. It's more about creativity rather than analytics. It's more about great days to be a gamer than it is about games that are great but will be forgotten in a couple of days. Switchcraft out.